future.
There are no people.
There are no people in the future.
No people at all.
There are no people in the future.
Where did all my people go?
There are no people in the future.
Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Ah, oh. Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. Yes, it's the Wednesday of February. It is Wednesday, February 9th, 2022. Welcome to another episode of The Wednesday Show with Cyril Mychalejko. Cyril's a progressive columnist for the Bucks County Courier Times, the Intelligencer, and now the Bucks County Beacon. Yes, indeed. This show joins Out to Coop Live, our Monday evening interview show, and our Friday politics roundup, where we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You should also sign up for Cyril's newsletter on Substack. That's cyrilmychalejko.substack.com. The link for that will be in the show notes. And you can help support this show right now by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress and show your support for little independent media here. You can also help out the show by heading over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for the show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. Make sure to join our Discord server to continue the conversation all week long. Just click on the link in today's show notes too as well. We got some great exchange that are going on there about some of the books everybody's reading, which is pretty cool. And a special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our new intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at @SongADayMan. That's @SongADayMan on Twitter. Well, on this week's show, we're going to catch up with Cyril about his latest article in the Bucks County Courier Times. That's Combat the Climate Crisis Before There's Nothing to Build Back. And we're going to hear about his new gig with the recently launched Bucks County Beacon. Yes, indeed. His first weekly column just dropped this past Friday, in which he sounded the call for progressive independent media in Bucks County. We'll also take a look at what's happening with his newsletter and get a sneak peek into some of the things he's working on. Good morning, Cyril. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Kevin. How are you?
Pretty good. I can't decide whether I'm cold or warm today, but other than that, it's pretty good. We had a little snow this morning, which turned to rain. Good old solid kind of Bucks County, Pennsylvania, February, I guess. So, but other than that, yeah, exactly. There we go. Well, it's good to have you back on. And first, congratulations on the new gig on Bucks County Beacon. That's really exciting.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. Those guys reached out to me last month, and we got to talking, and I really, liked what I was hearing about what they want to do with the newspaper, and and we'll talk about this a little later, but kind of continuing to build the progressive independent media ecosystem here, which obviously you've been part of for a long time.
Yeah.
Back when Raging Chicken was, I believe it started off as a print.
Indeed.
Online.
Online. We actually had a monthly. We started doing a kind of a monthly leaflet version of it at one point. But yeah. It's been around since 2011.
Was that right around the Wisconsin uprising?
Yeah. It was right after Wisconsin. I mean, that was the we launched in the first official issue came out in July 2011, and we had the website up and launched, and we had some initial content up there in kind of April 2011. That's when we hit the ground running. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I ran into you back then before we actually knew each other.
Yeah, we were back in. I remember having some conversations with you on the phone late at night, because it was the only time we could find. My kids were still young, and I was trying to find time to talk or stuff like this.
Yeah, for sure.
So crazy. Well, I got to say, so yeah, we'll talk about that piece in a little bit. I want to get to your latest column in the Bucks County Courier Times, the Intelligencer. It's called "Combat the Climate Crisis Before There's Nothing Left to Build Back." And I got to say, it's probably one of the more hopeful columns that I've read of yours in a while. You got a little bit of optimism kind of built into this one. I like it.
Yeah. I thought I'd try that. Try that on for a change. Step away from the doom and gloom that is like the far right kind of flooding Bucks County with their kind of toxic bile. But obviously, we can't. Climate change is something that's not reported on often enough. Period. Right. And, I would do it more if I had more column space more frequently. Now I'm going to have more, more with the Beacon, so that kind of like frees my hands to do, multiple other things that are always like on the back of my mind.
Right.
But yeah, the future does not look bright unless we start to do something about this now. And unfortunately, you got to give Biden credit. Like, he really went big with this Build Back Better bill with how it approaches climate change. I mean, it's
Right.
not perfect, right? But it's pretty transformational. And that's what we need, right? We need to transform the economy, move it away from a fossil fuel economy into a more sustainable, renewable energy economy. And, unfortunately, because of like the dysfunction of, the Senate, specifically, I guess that would be Manchin and Sinema.
Yep.
This bill got stalled. Never mind the fact that, like, how can Republicans not recognize that, like, we need to build up our infrastructure and deal with the climate crisis?
Well, here's something. This is the one thing that, I think if we break this down into kind of these two, I don't know, arenas, right? On the one hand, like, you lead this column, like, you're talking about this poll that came out by Yale and George Mason University, showing that about 2/3 of Americans across the political spectrum recognize the climate change as a national emergency. An overwhelming majority support policies that incentivize and transition to a clean energy economy and reduce industrial pollution. So what's significant, I think, about those poll numbers is that these are people recognized as a national emergency, not just kind of like an issue, right? And that it's pressing, so that there's a sense that there's a real kind of important coming to kind of consciousness, at least, away from the denialism, right? So you've kind of got that happening kind of among the population as a whole, but then you've got what's happening in official politics, whether we're talking at the statewide level or we're talking about the national level, where they're just nowhere near having the same kind of crisis response to climate. And they're treating it like just any other partisan political football, when we're talking about the kind of the livelihood of our futures. I mean, that seems to be kind of like the divide, and where that goes from here, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I think it underscores the importance of having, a climate justice movement out in the streets, kind of organizing, making noise, because we can't leave it to politicians. We can't leave them to their own devices to kind of
Right.
like, make the necessary changes that are going to, keep the planet from just, reaching some kind of like, collapse or some dystopian future. Even the Pentagon's planning for it, right? Like, they're planning for like these huge storms, these droughts, these great migrations, these resource wars, not over like oil like it used to be, but over like drinking water, right? Like
Drinking water, yep, and borders, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not, what's going to happen to our borders at this point,
So I talked to. What I wanted to try to do is just kind of like take this like global national issue and then localize it a bit. So I talked to a couple local folks. Helen Ty, who's great, ex-state rep, also longtime environmental advocate, and the conservation voters of Pennsylvania, who are actually actively like working on trying to get a standalone Build Back Better climate bill. Through the Senate. And, Molly Parson, who I spoke with, like, she broke it down pretty good. Like, if one way to depoliticize is just like ask people, like, do you want your kids to breathe like clean air, right? Do you want to have like them to drink clean, healthy water. And if you look at what's happening in, Pennsylvania, we have neither, right? Like
Exactly.
Pennsylvania ranks 47th nationally in air quality. And according to the American Lung Association, it gets an F in ozone pollution, the worst in the Philadelphia metropolitan area. And then, I was kind of like doing my research and, came across like the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection's report from just last month that said the state's waterways are getting more polluted and more unsafe for drinking, recreation, and wildlife.
Right.
And never mind that there's schools that still have like lead contaminated drinking water.
Well, this is what killed me that you say in there too, like this about this Lancaster Fox, Fox 43 revealed in August that hundreds of Pennsylvania schools have lead contaminated drinking water thanks to lead pipes. I mean, you're thinking about lead, which does damage with the ability to learn, is polluting the schools in the region. I mean, that's freaking insane to me.
You would think that this would be like a no-brainer, and at least the Democrats are trying to do something about it. Like the Republicans have nothing, like they're offering nothing, and then even like on the state level, just it's slightly related, but with the American Rescue Plan, they're hoarding like over $5 billion,
Right,
that could be used to kind of improve like infrastructure here in Pennsylvania. Never mind like helping like hurting families. That have been affected and impacted adversely by the pandemic. So, yeah, I mean, like people need to, I don't know. I mean, you need to call your senators and your lawmakers, and at some point we need to start making some noise, right? If they're not going to pass something, and if they don't get something done before the midterms, like who knows which way the elections are going to turn. I'm pretty worried about that.
100%. Yeah. Well, and I'm reminded, not to force us down into the kind of the doom and gloom pathway after such a kind of hopeful beginning, right? but I'm reminded of what I believe it was Kate Aronoff was writing about this in terms of climate and the shift is going in climate. It says, look, we've already seen shifts where what is happening in the Republican Party away from kind of sheer denialism. And now it's turning in much more darker ways, and we're seeing that the way this kind of links up to all this kind of right-wing militia, this kind of increased amount of kind of white supremacy emerging its head, and the kind of like pockets of this kind of environmental fascism. Right? They're saying, okay, look, we're not going to deny climate change anymore, but what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of protect ours against them. Right. So there's a way in which that, if we don't address this kind of openly and directly and aggressively now, that, it leaves the door open for a much more kind of fascistic kind of solution to the problem, and a much more brutal kind of human solution that, echoes in my mind a lot of some of the discourse we're seeing around the pandemic, right? It's just kind of, I want to do what's mine and don't force anything on me. And we're going to keep all these other people out that are, that want some of what we have. And that scares the crap out of me. So, I'm really hoping that we're going to see both at the statewide level and at the national level, a strong push for those climate provisions on the Build Back Better and, corresponding state legislation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the two things. Like, imagine if we had started kind of transitioning, let's just say back in like 92, right? Like when, like I think Al Gore wrote that like Earth in the Balance book, right? Kind of like raising the alarm. Like imagine where we'd be by now. Like 30.
Totally.
I mean, it's so frustrating, and that there has been this inaction. And then just the other thing I think like we probably should start thinking about is like whether these oil companies should be paying like environmental reparations.
Totally.
Because they've been, in addition to like just the devastation that their everyday kind of like operations cause, like the worst thing of it all, at least in my opinion, is that they were purposely pushing out disinformation to undermine the scientific consensus, even decades before 1992. right? I think this was, it goes back to I think it was like the late 70s with like ExxonMobil. Um, and the fact that they were doing that, I think that had long-term kind of harms, not just for the environment, but for the political conversation, which kind of has led us to the deadlock that we're dealing with now.
Yeah, 100%. And I think 100. Exactly. I'll kind of put my stamp right on that one too as well. Say, the oil companies, given the insane amount of profit that they are making, just kind of like off the charts kind of profit, that should be kind of basically taken and put towards climate mitigation, and they should pay a disproportionate share of their direct private profits they reap from us by externalizing all the costs of their business model onto us. And well, now it's time to pay the piper. I mean, it's the very least. You broke it, you bought it. That's pretty simple.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's sociopathic that they knew this was a problem, but they said, you know what, we're gonna just spend millions and millions of dollars to lie to the public anyway, because for us the bottom line is just profits.
Yep.
And to hell with everyone else, and to hell with the planet.
Yeah, crazy. So this has got to be the year, and this is where I look at the lead up to the midterms is going to be absolutely so critical. And this is the other thing. I mean, not to make too kind of abrupt of a transition here, but this is one of the reasons why I was thrilled, to find that you're going to be writing for the Bucks County Beacon now too as well, and you're going to have yet another platform on a kind of more regular basis. It's a weekly column, correct?
It is.
Yeah, and to be able to kind of, get these kind of independent voices that are out there, could get this analysis out there, especially as we're kind of approaching rapidly midterm elections, where all this stuff that we were just talking about is at stake.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely excited. I mean, you and I are like kind of cut from the same cloth, and just like internet media just kind of runs through our veins. And, I kind of like go into the piece about how, for me, my real first taste of it was when I was, I was a student at Evergreen, and I was starting there in January, and at that time, that's when there was the, 5-day anti-WTO protests in Seattle, and that's where like the Indie Media Online was born, using open source software. And what started it as just an independent media center in Seattle, which empowered independent journalists and media activists to report from on the ground and counter the kind of like misinformation, and I think at times disinformation, because it was kind of done on purpose, reporting around, the makeup of who the protesters were, what they were advocating, never mind like the just police violence, right? I mean, there's just like the martial law was declared. There was like an 8 p.m. curfew. They were firing rubber bullets and tear gas indiscriminately. And this was like 80,000 people, from like the Alliance of Retired Americans, the ARA, to the campesinas from like Central America, to like local students, to turtles and Teamsters, right? This was just like all of civil society was represented here. And for me, that it was just, I was just getting my feet wet with politics. It was just like a profound like impact on me. It was just, I by no means was some kind of like seasoned activist like involved. I was like a student who wanted to learn more and knew like this is something I should be involved in. But with the indie media, I mean, what it did effectively was just kind of like show the mainstream media's shortcomings and biases. And, if I'm sure like a lot of folks have read like Manufacturing Consent by like Chomsky and Herman, but just kind of like, it's the same, how that was covered is just like a reflection of like their thesis, with like the commercial and just kind of like status quo biases built in to these media outlets, never mind like some of it being like subconscious with how, they treat and portray people that look to disrupt the status quo.
Well, and I remember, the IMC, like the Independent Media Center that came, again, what you exactly were talking about. I remember how transformational that was, right? To be able to have a site to go to. And I remember working on it because, I lived in DC at the time, And I remember kind of like submitting to and reading like the DC IMC, but also what was happening from Seattle, and finding that, you know, there were these activists that basically said, okay, look, one of our problems is to be able to kind of get the story out in an unfiltered way, and in a way that kind of captures the actual reasons why people are kind of out there protesting, and to give the analysis and the kind of perspective from the activists themselves. And so the IMC was a place where those voices came out, and it was a like a breath of fresh air, because, you know, again, we know how important video, like cell phones, have become in the Black Lives Matter movement now, for example. And back then it was like camcorders and people uploading video of, like, you know, streaming video, what we would call it now, right? Streaming video of what actually happened at a particular protest. So you'd have these police statements would come out, and then you'd have newspaper coverage that would, of course, listen to the police and reprint what they were saying. And yet you had this counter narrative that was there for everyone to see, of actual footage of what actually happened, and that would kind of get loaded to the IMC. And that was, you know, again, that's the power of that independent media, is to be able to say, hey, look, they're not covering the whole story. They say they are, but they're not. Just look, they're making these claims. It turns out, look, they lied. You can see it for yourself. And then communities were born out of that. And there's a way that was also for people to find each other, right? And to build community around those sites too. It was extraordinary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there was the Philly IMs. I mean, they were all over the place. Like every city, even smaller cities in the U.S., Central, South America, Asia, Russia, everywhere. But I mean, in Philly, you know, they covered like the Republican National Convention in like 2000, and I was kind of like involved with that as well. But yeah, and like you said, like it not only like democratizes like who is the media, but it democratized who's covered or who's interviewed, right? Because like one of the things is just like time and again, and this still happens, is just that the, you know, critical voices or activist voices or advocate voices, you know, they're often just either completely disregarded, or there's just like the balance is unequal, right?
Yep.
And so, you know, that was a problem with, you know, that's part of the reason why we got like NAFTA and the WTO, is because they weren't talking to like workers or farmers or environmentalists, where, you know, who were going to be like most impacted by these trade agreements. They were talking to the CEOs and their politicians, right? Just kind of like pushing their narrative. And, you know, this is something that I think like that experience in Seattle, that kind of led me to kind of, you know, be part of like Upside Down World, which was like a huge part of my life for over like a dozen years, where I was part of the editorial collective of an online magazine covering politics and activism in Latin America, which was completely grassroots, reader funded, with writers, translators, you know, photographers, editors, you know, from Canada down to Bolivia. And actually, like, you know, we've had people that, you know, are from other parts of the world, like my friend Hannah, who I highlighted on Mina Progressive.
Yep.
She's actually from Sweden, but did some solidarity work in Bolivia and Ecuador, and actually wrote and reported for us. And building that community is just like another, like what you said, what you just said, like it's just so important. And that's why I'm excited about kind of, you know, being part of the Beacon, because I think there's the potential that, you know, the Beacon, along with like what you're doing with Raging Chicken and the Kano Show, and then just kind of like building on top of what all these other folks have already been doing for years, you know, with like Rise Up and Bucks County Anti-Racism Coalition. You know, we need to grow bigger. We need to become stronger. We need to tell our own stories and make sure these stories get heard to as broad of an audience as possible.
100%. And I know this is something that's been kind of an increasing theme on Out to Coop Live and on our Friday show. And you and I have talked about this too as well, about the need to build out, say, a Bucks County wide kind of coalition. We've talked about it in terms of, we had Amy Connect on again this past Friday. She was my guest co-host for this Friday's Politics Roundup, and we talked about that too as well, about those needs to kind of connect. And one of the things that I've been toying around with and had some initial conversations with some people about is like really looking, maybe we should be thinking about kind of having this independent progressive media summit this summer, kind of like a meetup of folks that are involved in it, and just to kind of like bounce some ideas around. Again, I don't think any of us has like the cash flow or independent wealth that we can just kind of like book out a hotel rooms and big conference center, I think, but we could certainly find places where we can kind of meet up, right? Sit around and kind of talk a little bit about strategizing as we move into the midterm elections. And I think that, you being part of the Bucks County Beacon is going, to only add to that fervor toward wanting to get that progressive kind of independent media activism out there.
Yeah, no, that would be amazing, and I would definitely want to be part of that. That would be great. We should try to start planning that with some different folks.
Yep.
Yeah, and we want to cover like a lot of the stories as well. Like I'll have my column, but just they have Linda Lee, who's like a former New York Times reporter. She's been covering local issues. She just had a piece about the debate over the gun show in Newtown that one of Jim Worthington's properties will potentially host if it actually goes through. So just kind of, filling in the cracks of what kind of gets missed in the mainstream media. And I wanted to make clear in the column that like I think like there's the local reporters have been doing like a bang up job.
I agree. Yep.
Emily Rizzo and Chris Ulrich, they're just, I don't know where this area would be without them. The problem is like we can't clone like 5 or 6 more copies of them and staff them because with everything that's happening in Bucks County, the two of them couldn't possibly cover everything, right? And so that's like where your podcast comes in, where my column and now working with the Beacon comes in, just kind of like building on that, because like information is power, right?
Absolutely. Look, and there's people, this is why I've always said about spaces like Raging Chicken and like these independent media sites is like, they're places where people can cut their teeth on this kind of work and do this research. Because, frankly, look, there's amazing people that are doing incredible research already in the community. And a lot of people came to it by necessity, right? They weren't trained as journalists. They weren't trained as, kind of independent investigators. No, they were kind of got invested with a particular issue and then found out that there was something wrong and started doing this research and kind of reporting on it. And so where do you go with that? How do you develop that? And I think that's the role in so many ways of the kind of, this kind of broader independent kind of media infrastructure where people are kind of getting some of the training, cutting their teeth on that work. And ideally, it's a space to kind of develop those skills and to bolster the work that is happening, in the quote unquote mainstream press, local press. So, I mean, that's, I've always thought about that, but like that, because, if you had Chris Ullery, imagine if he had 2 or 3 understudies, so to speak, right? Yeah. Where they would be in training because they wanted to build those skills out, and that's something to work for, certainly, but it's not something we have now. So people need to have a place and have places where they can actually do that work, right? Where they can see what it's like and develop those skills so that we make sure we're not waiting around for what do they call it? The man in the white hat to come and save the day, so to speak.
Yeah, it's about kind of like growing that culture, right? Where like people want to kind of get engaged and get involved with this, and we both started when we were much younger than we are now, so we need some new blood in here as well to help us out. And we still got a long way to go. Don't get me wrong.
No, exactly.
So, it had such a profound impact on my life. Just kind of doing that kind of activism in media, and you see a lot of the kids are really clued in here in Bucks County, and like you said, we already have so many talented activists and writers. You had one really amazing writer on who's also a teacher, Diane Lagerman.
She's freaking incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we just need, the main thing is just we need to make sure that everyone kind of like buys in, right? Because it only works if everyone's involved and everyone's kind of supporting it, no matter, how little, right? But everyone just needs to kind of come together and help build this out so that, it can be impactful, effective, like I said, so that it can be like an organizing tool that helps mobilize people locally, in order to push back against all of these like far right onslaughts,
Exactly.
that are just kind of like trying to push their way into schools, into local government, just into like the culture of like what's like acceptable now here in Bucks County, and then just have our progressive alternative, which is one about justice, humanity, sustainability.
About
All those
taking care of each
controversial.
other too. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
really basic stuff, right?
yeah. All those controversial, ideas.
No, 100%. Well, listen, man. I'm thrilled about that. I'm looking forward to, and I think that we just got to make this happen this summer. Kind of get some folks from the independent media scene, progressive media scene, some activists to kind of together, to see which ways that we can start kind of building in a much more kind of like conscious, and conscious manner moving forward. I think that sounds like the direction we need to be going. So,
Absolutely.
hey, so what do you got kind of in the hopper? What are some of the things that you're working on? Kind of what are we expecting in the weeks to come?
Okay. First, I just want to I want to plug my latest newsletter just because there's some like good stuff in there. There's Melissa Ryan who
That was
she
great.
has her
Yeah.
own newsletter, Control Alt Right Delete, which I like the name.
Yeah.
And she gives some like basic ideas about tracking far right activity, in your community. And as listeners of Raging Chicken know, there's a lot of far right activity in our community. But I think what we need is like a centralized kind of like database. So I don't know if we would want to like break this down where there's like kind of like representatives from like each school district and have like some kind of like shared doc. But that's a conversation that like maybe we should have, possibly, with some folks on the podcast in
Yep.
another column, etc. But she gives you like a good, it's like a broad brushstroke of some just like simple things that we can do to kind of document this, because it's important to kind of like have this kind of information centralized, readily available, not only for ourselves but for like outside media when we want to kind of like have people continue to shine a light on what's happening here.
Yeah.
And one thing that another article that I included in the newsletter, which I wish there was would have been something done similarly here, which was Lancaster Online's investigative reporter Carter Walker kind of like did this piece about, there was those Patriot Front leaks that we talked about a while back, and he just kind of like put the data in, mapped it out, about like where they were spreading the most propaganda. Surprise, surprise, southeastern Pennsylvania is a hot spot, right? As was Bucks County, because there's some different schools of thought on how to approach this. I don't know. I feel like shining a light on this is better than kind of like keeping our heads in the sand. Some critics might say like you're kind of like giving them publicity, but like people need to know who they are, so that they're equipped to have the types of conversations with people that they know, because oftentimes they're targeting young teenage and young
Right.
adult, guys, men,
Yep.
boys and men. And so, I think this is something, I thought the piece was great. I hope people check it out on Lancaster Online. Yeah, just wanted to get that out there as well. Moving forward, gosh, I have so many things up in the air. So little time. I'm working on my next few columns. I want to do something, in honor of, Black History Month, which should be every month, for all of us, especially in light of the fact that, history is under assault, by school boards. from Penridge to Palisades and across the country. And I'm thinking about, I'm kind of like digging into how the Republicans are trying to legislate through constitutional amendments, which I think is kind of like very undemocratic and dangerous. And so I'll be talking about why that is, and just kind of like unpacking that for readers. Yeah, and there's a list. There's a huge list, but I know we've been running long. So
No, I'm sure. I look there. I mean, that's again, this is the reason why I'm so glad that you're going to be got a weekly column at the Beacon too as well, because there is so much to cover. But let's all remember that Cyril is but one person, right? So all the more reasons to kind of grow independent progressive media right here in Bucks County too as well. Well, hey man, it's great talking again. I've been back for the Wednesday show. This is absolutely fantastic, and congratulations again on the Bucks County Beacon. And look forward to the next round of this, because things are moving fast. Let's put it this way: we got a primary coming up on May 17th, and that seems like right around the corner at this point. So we got our work cut out for us.
Thanks, Kevin. I look forward to being back on soon.
Yeah, you got it. All right. So, hey, everybody, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Want to thank you so much for tuning in. Want to remind you that you can help support this show. You can head on over to Twitter. Follow us on Twitter at RC Press. You can head on over to our YouTube channel. Subscribe. Talk to you soon. See ya!